Good morning and welcome to this week's live event. My name is Elsa Kepi and I'm a somatic relationship and intimacy coach here in Nova Scotia, Canada. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about loneliness, particularly how it relates to when we leave a narcissistic or abusive relationship. Often we're so excited and immersed in the getting away from the abuse that we have no kind of thought for the future. And that's fine. We have to get out of where we are before we can deal with anything else. But what often happens and ends up sabotaging our attempt to leave an abusive relationship is the huge overwhelming feeling of loneliness that comes up as we, a few hours to a few days, sometimes a few weeks after we've left that relationship, we're hit by this huge wave of like isolation and loneliness. And we realize that the relationship that we're in was kind of this all-consuming thing. And now we're kind of unsure what to do with that. Like, we don't know where to turn. So we have this huge feeling of loneliness. And that is what I hear from so many women I felt lonely, and then I texted my ex, or I texted the person, and that got me back into the cycle, or they talked me into coming back, or however it was. And there's no shame about that. This is a common thing, because the loneliness is real. That grieving, that loneliness, that heartache, the fact that we just feel completely isolated is a really intense feeling. And it's in our body. It's not just up here. We're not just thinking about, oh, I'm kind of lonely, I'd like to go. It's a real like somebody's put this huge magnet on you, drawing you back in. And so it's something that is worth thinking about, or worth getting support with quickly, so that you have other tools and ways of working, and a therapist, or a coach, or somebody that can really be there with you through that whole journey, because it will be intense, and it takes a huge amount of fortitude to get through that stage of loneliness and that roller coaster of emotions, until you can get to a kind of place where you can actually kind of go, okay, I can breathe again, now I can start working on myself. So a couple of things I see in women is jumping to the wanting to work on themselves too quickly, is in a way a denial of our actual feelings. And that denial of our feelings is what got us in trouble in the first place. So I'll try to explain a little bit. And I think probably one of the best ways to explain things sometimes is to read a story. So this is actually a story I'm going to read to you, and it's from, John Bradshaw's book, Homecoming, which honestly, I think it was back in the 70s. And things, it still holds true today. We are still dealing with a lot of the same things. So this story is called The Almost Tragic Story of a Tender Elf. So I'm just going to read the story. And so if you're at home listening, have a seat, get a cup of tea. There's going to be a little storytelling time. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of delving into that feeling of loneliness. Once upon a time, there was a tender little elf. He was a very happy elf. He was bright and curious and knew the secrets of life. For example, he knew that love was a choice, that love involved hard work, that love was the only way. He knew that he could do magic things, and that his unique form of magic was called creativity. The little elf knew that as long as he truly created, there would be no violence. And he knew the greatest secret of all, that he was something rather than nothing. He knew he was being, that being was everything. This was called the secret of I amness. The creator of all elves was the great I am. The great I am always was and always will be. No one knew how or why this was true. The great I am was totally loving and creative. Another most important secret was the secret of balance. The secret of balance meant that all life is a marriage of opposites. There is no life without physical death, no joy without sorrow, No pleasure without pain, no light without darkness, no sound without silence, no good without bad. True health is a form of wholeness, and wholeness is holiness. The great secret of creativity was to balance a wild, creative, unfocused energy with a form that allows that energy to be. One day, our tender elf, whose name, by the way, was Joni, was given another secret. This secret scared him a little bit. The secret was that he had a mission he must do before he could create forever. He had to share his secret with a ferocious tribe of non-elves. You see, elf life was so good and wonderful that the secret of that wonder needed to be shared with those who didn't know anything about the wonderment. Goodness always wants to share itself. Each elf was assigned to one family of the ferocious non-elf tribe. The non-elf tribe was called Snamu. Well, I think that's how you pronounce it. The Snamu knew no secrets. They often squandered their beings. They worked endlessly and seemed to feel alive only when they were doing something. Some elves referred to them as doos. They also killed one another and engaged in war. Sometimes at sporting events and music concerts, they trampled one another to death. Joni entered his Snamu family on June 29th, 1933 at 3:05 a.m. He had no idea what was in store for him. He didn't know that he would have to use every ounce of his creativity in order to tell his secrets. When he was born, he was given the Snamu name Farquhar. His mother was a beautiful 19-year-old princess who was ravished by a need to perform. She had a strange curse on her. The curse was a neon bulb that rested in the middle of her forehead. Whenever she tried to play, have fun, or just be, the light blinked on and a voice said, "Do your duty." She could never just do nothing and be. Farquhar's father was a short but handsome king. He also carried a curse. He was haunted by his wicked witch mother Harriet. She lived on his left shoulder. Anytime he tried to just be, she screamed and yelled. Harriet was always telling him to do something. In order for Farquhar to tell his parents and others his secrets, they needed to be quiet and stop doing long enough to see and hear him. This they could not do. His mom because of the neon bulb, and his dad because of Harriet. From the moment he was born, Farquhar was all alone. Since he had the body of a Snamu, he also had the feelings of a Snamu, and because of his abandonment, he felt furious, deeply frustrated, and hurt. Here he was, a tender elf, who knew the great secrets of I am, and no one would listen to him. What he had to say was life-giving, but his parents were so busy doing their duty, they could not learn from him. In fact, his parents were so confused, they thought it was their job to teach Farquhar to do his duty. Anytime he failed to do what they thought was his proper duty, they punished him. Sometimes they ignored him by putting him in his room. Sometimes they hit him or screamed at him. In fact, Farquhar hated the screaming the worst. He could take the isolation, and the hitting was over with quickly, but the screaming and endless telling him about his duty went so deep that it even threatened his elf soul. Now, you cannot kill an elf's soul because it is part of the great I am, but it can be so badly wounded that it seems like it isn't there anymore. This is what happened to Farquhar. In order to survive, he stopped trying to show his mother and father his secrets and instead pleased them by performing and doing his duty. His mom and dad were very unhappy Snamus. Actually, most Snamus are unhappy unless they learn the secret of the elves. Farquhar's dad was so tormented by Harriet that he used all his energy to find a magic potion that took away all his feelings. But the magic was not creativity. It actually took away his creativity. Farquhar's dad became like a walking dead man. After a while, he stopped even coming home. Farquhar's Snamu's heart was broken, You see, every Snamu needs both his father's and his mother's love in order to let the elf in him tell his secrets. Farquhar was overwhelmed by his father's abandonment, and since his father could no longer help his mother, her neon bulb blinked more intensely. Consequently, Farquhar was yelled at and cajoled even more. By the time he reached his 12th birthday, he'd forgotten he was an elf. A few years later, he learned about the magic potion that his father used to kill Harriet's voice. At 14, he started using it often. By his 30th year, he had to be carried away to a Snamu hospital. While in this hospital, he heard an inner voice urging him to wake up. The voice that moved him to wake up was the being voice of his elf soul. For you see, no matter how bad it gets, the elf voice will always call a Snamu to celebrate his being. Joni never gave up. He never stopped trying to save Farquhar. If you're a Snamu and you're reading this, please remember this. You have an elf soul in you that is always trying to call you to your being. When Farquhar was lying in the hospital, he finally heard Joni's voice, and that made all the difference. And that is the beginning of another better story. So I always love a good story for teaching purposes, because stories just get to the heart of things quickly. So I don't know about you, but even in just reading that story, I can feel grief. I can feel sadness coming up in my heart. You know, for myself, for Joni, for the elves, for just everyone that has been raised in a place that didn't welcome their wholeness, their whole being. And so feeling that sadness, that grief is actually a huge part of beginning our journey towards wholeness and our journey towards not being stuck in the loneliness and the overreaching for another distraction that takes us away from our real feelings. Because, you know, in that story, he ended up in hospital and there isolated in bed with no other distractions and nothing else around him. He could hear the voice when he was close to death, perhaps, right? So we have to get to that place of having no distractions and being quiet, and we hear the voice. We hear that voice that is calling us to ourselves. So, you know, we want to distract ourselves for it. Why? Because a lot of it, because the grief is real, and it's tough to feel grief. Like, grief encompasses so many emotions. And one of the things that, you know, I just spoke to one of the grads of my program recently, and she's actually becoming a life coach. So proud of her, to work with this as well. So that's awesome. You know, but all the emotions, she said, you helped me feel the emotions. You have to get there where you're willing to feel that. And sometimes we need support to feel that. The toxic shame that we may have taken in from our families and our parents and our culture and our religion and all the things can overlie us being able to feel our feelings as well. And so we're kind of stuck in this place of not wanting to feel. Usually it's a young child part of ourselves that wasn't met, you know, in our own family, or, you know, we were overly protected. You know, it can go either way. I've actually had some clients and women that have come to me, you know, saying, I had a really great family. My parents did everything, you know, they were awesome, but did they see your soul? Did they honor that, you know, or did they kind of overprotect you and help shepherd you through what they thought was the right life for you? Was there something in you that didn't get to grow up? You know, or even just the naivete of not realizing that grief and pain and sorrow and anger and frustration are all parts of life. You know, if you just kind of lived a magical childhood and never got to experience, you know, the opposites, right? The balance between life and death, you know, good and bad, dark and light, all of those things. So some people come and end up in abusive relationships later on because they've been so protected that they actually haven't learned that balance either. So a big part of the work that we come to when we're kind of starkly in front of ourselves, when we've left, an abusive relationship, or we've gotten far enough away to realize that, okay, now I'm really looking at myself. And if you look and you go, oh shit, I don't know who I am, and I don't know how to meet myself, then you end up feeling this deep loneliness, because really what we're longing for is ourself. We're longing for that inner child, to bring all the parts of ourselves, those parts of ourselves all the way through our life. We want to kind of bring them all together to the present moment. Many of you have read many self-help books, probably more than me even, and it all talks about being in the present moment. But how do we do that? Well, we do that by bringing all of these wounded parts of ourselves along and reparenting them up to the present moment where we can hold ourselves. Because what we are longing for is an intimacy with ourselves first and foremost. And that doesn't mean shutting everyone out and going, I'm good, I don't need any help, I'm good by myself. That's kind of a denial of our feelings as well. But it's a learning to love ourselves so much so that we can actually experience that total unconditional love with ourselves instead of looking for it out there. Because when we have relationships with other people, they're never going to be perfect relationships. Like, none of us love perfectly. None of us can love perfectly. We all love with our own wounds. We all love, kind of imperfectly, which is great. Perfectly imperfect, right? But we're not going to find that perfect love out there. But we will find that perfect unconditional love within ourselves. We can love ourselves in that unconditional way. You could call it God loving us, or spirit, or the great one, or whatever name you want to put on that. It all has the same effect of finding that within ourselves, but that acceptance, self-acceptance, and love for ourselves. And from that place, we can be accepting of the imperfectly perfect love that we might have with other people. And then, we're also much more able to recognize when, someone is narcissistic or manipulative. They can make it seem like they're going to give us that perfect love. They will give us that perfect love, and we won't have to do the work ourselves. And that's where we get in the trap of looking out there for the things that we need to do in here. And, it's a both and. So again, it's, the isolation to intimacy is so closely related that, if you are in that place of feeling completely isolated and lonely, then that is the perfect place from which to meet yourself. And, a really great coach or therapist or someone to work with can help you, a mentor can help you to find that with yourself. But you want to find someone that is able to help you hold that space for yourself, that isn't coming in with any agenda for them, right? They don't need you to do a certain thing. They don't need you to be anything, because that is a trap again, and you'll get drawn into that. So these deep core feelings of grief and toxic shame and loneliness, we feel bad that we're, not good enough. That leads to the loneliness. And so the only place to really recover if that is really to work with ourselves. And so, that's, I'm not the only person working in this area, but my programs have help you develop that inner resilience, that inner growing up process, right? That we never got to go through, perhaps, or we didn't go through. Many of us haven't gone through. You look around in the world and you go, well, there's some walking kids, there's a few walking teenagers in adult bodies, right? And we're not actually growing up and being present to who we are as adults, with this maturity, this balance, that, the elf knowledge, if you want to call it, from our story. So things like beginning with hope. If you are a kid, the power of being. So we learn to trust or mistrust very early on. This is one of the first stages of learning to relate. And depending on what your circumstances were, were you in a place where you learned to trust, or did you learn to mistrust? And, that will lead to the next stage, which, would be autonomy, having like an autonomy to do your own thing, versus shame and doubt. If you mistrust, that leads to shame and doubt because now you're mistrusting. And the next stage might be having an initiative, like being able to go and actually have an initiative to go do something, versus a guilt that kind of stops us doing things. And then it leads to competence. Do you have the industry to, or competence to go and stick to learning something, going to school, doing something, versus an inferiority complex, if you will, right? And then we might develop our identity. If we're healthy, and maturing that way, we'll develop our own self-identity, versus kind of a role diffusion, like we just try to please other people. And then we work to intimacy. We can actually experience intimacy, versus isolation. And that's where a lot of us, kind of notice this, these issues coming up. And then we'd have generativity versus stagnation. So we'd be able to be generative in the world. We can create things, right? Our creativity that was talked about in that elf story as well, versus stagnation and just kind of not really feeling like we're getting anywhere in life. And, finally, we would have wisdom. We would have an integrity versus despair, which many of us, unfortunately get to. So if we've climbed that kind of, from mistrust to doubt to guilt to inferiority to diffusion and pleasing to isolation to stagnation to despair, many of us can recognize that side of the ladder. We need to actually learn to climb the other side of the ladder, from trust to autonomy to initiative, industry, identity, intimacy, generativity, into integrity. So these are the, we have to kind of go back and relearn, these things about ourselves. And so this process of relearning about ourselves is a process, and something that you want to work with someone who can kind of take you through the stages and help you do that. But during that time also, you want to become increasingly independent in your own work, but not too early, right? So this is where it's tricky, because we need to trust someone enough to work with them. And I have noticed recently, especially because of COVID, that trust is increasingly difficult to find, because who do we trust? It's actually coming down to, we can't trust the media, or we can't trust our government, we can't trust our neighbor, we can't trust ourselves, we can't trust our body, we can't trust our immune system. So many things have been kind of brought up around trust that, even to start the process of trusting that somebody will have a process or be able to take our hand or walk us through, help start us off on this process of self-development is difficult. So, learning to trust and take that leap of faith is the first step in beginning this process. We come into the world as that innocent, elf in our story, came in trusting that, that we're going to kind of move forward. So that's what I would say to any of you that are finding yourself in this, isolation, lonely place, that place, that feeling of, oh my God, I need somebody in my life. And then you're going to, you could either go out and find somebody that promises to love you unconditionally and kind of love bombs you. And I would imagine most of us know where that's going to end up. Or you look for someone that you feel can help you to find yourself, find that self-love in your own self, in your body. And likely, it could be an intimate relationship, not saying it can't, but it's likely going to be you and some type of professional therapist or psychotherapist or coach that works with emotional abuse, or a program like that, because that's a lot to expect in an intimate relationship, especially if you're just learning about each other. So I would say, I have seen some women find amazing partners and then begin their work, and that's amazing. But you still have to do your inner work. So my invitation to you is that if you are watching this and you're, enjoying the group and you've taken some time to look at all the videos, like I think it's 3 or 4 years, what are we at, 2022? 4 years of videos are in this group. So please go watch some of the other videos. I've been in here almost every week. Watch the videos, see if they resonate with you. Look at, what's going on, get some of the pieces, and then take that leap of faith for yourself. At that point of feeling really lonely, reach for something different. Reach for something that is going to help you get to that place of knowing yourself, that solution. And so I invite you to book a call with me. I would love to be able to have a chat with you and know your particular situation. Where are you starting from? What would you like to, where would you like to get to? And, if it's a fit to work together through something that I have set up or something we can set up. So that's what I would say. I've been there. I've been through the process. I've taken many people through the process. And my offering is, a free call, no obligation. I would love to meet many of you that are out there that either listening to this video or in my Facebook group. I would love to just have the opportunity to learn more about you. And that makes our community stronger. And if you're not in the Facebook group and you're watching this video, the group is called Healing from Emotional Abuse with Power, Passion, and Pleasure. And so those are, some of my kind of core values that I want to bring to this work. So I hope you enjoyed that talk. I hope it gave you a little bit of an insight. And if you missed the story time at the beginning, go back and listen to the beginning of the video, because, that story should touch you, and help you to begin that feeling of grieving the loss that we're actually grieving there. And I think, I may do at some point something on the grieving process. There is, I think, a video about that if you search in the group, but I may revisit that. But I hope you all have a wonderful Saturday. I will put the link to give me a call in the chat. But you can also reach out to me at ailsakepi.com/apply, APPLY, and you can book a call. Like I said, love to talk to you. All right. Take care.